When the Supreme Court legalized abortion throughout pregnancy, controversy raged on the issue of killing unborn babies. Political pundits all agree that the new president, with his appointments on the Supreme Court, could alter the abortion equation. Join me as I talk with various experts on the importance of abortion in the presidential election. What role does the judicial branch of government play in the state of our nation? I met with 4 leaders in Washington, D.C. to gain some insight on the political forecast of the U.S. Supreme Court. And I asked how the next president will impact the rules that govern this nation. I began my inquiry at Susan B. Anthony List, an organization strategically supporting pro-life congresswomen and men to Congress. What motivated you to start the organization?
Mainly those women, I have to say, who I did not agree with. I don't know if I would have done it otherwise. However, it was just such an outrage to me that these women like Patricia Schroeder and Barbara Boxer were claiming to speak for me, and I was a convert to the pro-life cause, and so I remember thinking like they thought, and I knew how wrong they were and how disserved women and children were. And also, you know, a woman has a special place in this debate, not exclusive of men, but entirely complementary to our male friends. But we have the ability to bear children. We understand intimately that connection between mother and child, that if it's broken, it breaks all sorts of things in the culture. There's a ripple effect throughout the culture. Women have a heart for that, and they needed to speak up. That was really my impetus.
Star Parker knows this life is a journey filled with choices, and as a woman, some of these choices are harder to confront.
I was involved in criminal activity, drug activity, sexual promiscuity, in and out of abortion clinic after clinic. And finally, I just really got tired, and I was pregnant again in a very short period of time. I made a decision down inside that there just has to be something wrong with killing your offspring. So I opted not to kill that 5th pregnancy and ended up on welfare. And I'm in this little black hole, and that's where God found me. And when I found out just how much He loved me and would take my life and redeem it, I just said, oh, that sounds really, really cool.
Now, do you think abortion is going to play a key prominence in the presidential election this year?
Well, I'm going to be sure that I do everything that I can do to make sure that it does. It is the issue confronting us today. It's only one symptom of the cultural war, and we are in a struggle.
Curt, what has the U.S. Supreme Court's decision legalizing abortion done to our nation?
A lot of bad things. Even putting aside the number of unborn babies that have died, it's just been incredibly politically divisive. And of course, that's what happens when you have black or white made up fiat from the Supreme Court, as it cuts off all possibility of compromise and reasoned debate. And perhaps even worse, it set the stage for unlimited judicial activism. That was really the signal in 1973 Roe v. Wade that the courts could make anything up and weren't embarrassed to do it. And that the courts were sort of the voice for the intellectual elite. Neither then nor now is there a big majority supporting abortion, but then and now the intellectual elites, New York Times, Washington Post, etc., Hollywood, were very much pro-choice, and that's what the Supreme Court follows. They don't really care that much what people in Kansas and Nebraska and Ohio think.
I met with former U.S. Senator Mike DeWine to gain an inside perspective on how much influence the judicial system has over our nation. Senator, tell me about your role on the Judiciary Committee. You served there very well when both Justice Alito, Chief Justice Roberts had their hearing. Tell us what a bird's eye view was sitting behind that desk in the thick of things.
Well, Brett, I served 8 years on the Judiciary Committee in the House, and then 12 years on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. So 20 years altogether. But of course, the Senate Judiciary Committee is different than the House Judiciary Committee. We got the nominations, we got the federal district judges, the appellate judges, the circuit judges. But what the public, of course, looks at most is the United States Supreme Court and those hearings. And those hearings can be, frankly, quite very interesting.
To say the least.
Yeah, it's you know, what's it like? Well, it's a lot of. I think what goes on there is a lot of legal questions, but a lot of showmanship as well. And senators try to make a point or points, either to the public or sometimes maybe just to the judge.
What issues did you bring up relating to the abortion issue?
We had a very interesting exchange on abortion. One of the great debates in our history is over abortion. And the stakes are very high because we know that the Supreme Court is divided almost evenly. 5-4 decisions are what we see now on abortion cases. Some going the right way, such as partial birth abortion, where they upheld that, some going the wrong way.
In response to the ban on partial birth abortions, pro-abortion leaders have introduced the Freedom of Choice Act in the Senate Judiciary Committee. If this bill gains momentum and eventually passes, the right to unlimited abortion on demand would be codified in federal law for decades to come. When we return, well, Marjorie, you've not always been pro-life, so what was it that changed your mind? When the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion during all 9 months of pregnancy and for any reason, a passion stirred in the hearts of Americans. As a result, the pro-life movement has gained momentum over the years. Since 1973, 2 opposing groups have staked their claims: those who oppose abortion and those who support it. But it seems the pro-life side is gaining new supporters every day. Marjorie is one of them.
I think about this a lot. You know, God's grace is not always obvious. So I have thought about it a lot, and I would have to say that it was a slow change, but it would never have happened if on Duke campus, when I was really active on the other side of this issue, if friends of mine had not come to me and basically been relentless, just wouldn't leave me alone. I was a co-chair of the College Republicans at Duke, and I was actually I was equal time. There was a co-chair that was pro-life, and I was the pro-choice co-chair. They wouldn't leave me alone, and also I started taking philosophy. Also, I started to go through a religious conversion. Sort of all things came together at the same time, and finally I just had to look at what was happening with abortion and say, what is that? You know, what is that thing that is inside a woman's body? And if you come to the point where you're saying it's a baby, human baby, then you got to really think about your pro-choice position.
What impact do you think the future president of the United States will have regarding the impact of abortion on African Americans?
Actually, the existing administration has moved the issue forward a little bit to make folks aware that we need to redevelop a culture of life. But banning abortion, making it a requisite for the type of person that they are going to place on the Supreme Court is really important, that the person that the president selects to sit on the courts understand fundamentally life and understand fundamentally what the framers had in mind when they drafted the Constitution. The president plays a major role in making sure that we as a society understand that this may be legal, but it's not lawful in God's eyes, and we have to move ourselves to rid ourselves of this great horror.
It depends on who the president is, what person he nominates. President, he or she has a huge decision. If you look at the composition of the Supreme Court today, it really is a 5-4 split, with Justice Kennedy being the 5th vote, going one way on some and one way on the other. So what it tells us is that when we get to the next hearing, people are going to be looking at that and saying, this will change the complexion of the court, and it will make it one way or the other. So it's going to be very much on people's minds.
And it kind of underscores, Senator, the importance of who the next president is, as well as who the senators are that will be voting on that confirmation, correct?
The next president of the United States will appoint, we don't know how many members of the U.S. Supreme Court, but Justice Stevens is 88. Some of the other members have been on the court a long time, and we don't know what their health is, but you know, you would assume that the next president will get several appointments to the Supreme Court, just from a historical point of view. That's the way it usually works. We also know, and this is something that I think many times the public doesn't think about, the next president of the United States, if he serves 8 years, will appoint about half of the members of the federal judiciary. That's huge. And so who the president puts on those courts makes a huge, huge difference.
If Roe versus Wade is overturned, what impact do you think that would have on America's women and their unborn children?
Well, I think it would depend where you live, frankly. It would return the decision to the states. So there are many states, especially in the Northeast and out west, where things wouldn't change at all, where the states would, would keep abortion on demand. There's other states, let's call them the purple states, where you'd probably wind up with moderate restrictions on abortion. No abortion in the third term, strong parental notification and spousal notification laws. And then there's a number of red states where I think abortion would be permitted under very few circumstances. I'm not sure how many states will go so far as to say that a woman can't have an abortion even if there's actual danger to her life, but I think in many states you'll see the number of abortions drop, so that will obviously have a very positive effect on unborn babies.
Do you think that law will ever be turned over and unborn babies will once again be protected?
I am certain of it. I am certain of it.
What makes you so sure?
Because what we're witnessing now is an enormous cultural change. Our laws are way behind public opinion on the pro-life question.
When we return, I'll talk with each of our guests about the long-term impact the next president can have on the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court. And later, I'll share how you can influence who's appointed to this powerful high court. In this special edition of Facing Life Head On, we're looking at the influence of the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of abortion. I met with Senator Mike DeWine to talk about the future of America if a pro-abortion president is in the White House. Some have said, Senator, that if a pro-abortion president is seated and appoints further pro-abortion Supreme Court justices, and they're confirmed, that this would have decades of effect on abortion on demand for America's future. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Whoever is elected, it will have a long-term impact. Unlike senators who serve a 6-year term, unlike House members who serve a 2-year term and the voters get a chance to take them out after a few years, Supreme Court nominees, once they're confirmed, are there for life. And even if the president who appointed them is upset with them, or if Congress is upset with them, or the public is upset with them, it doesn't matter. They're going to be there for the rest of their life if they want to be. And as we've seen, sometimes that's 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It's a long, long, long time.
And we're talking virtually generations to come.
Generations to come. There's a trend towards appointing judges and Supreme Court justices younger and younger. So I think there's every reason to believe that the average Supreme Court justice appointed over the next 20 years will be about 50. So we're talking 30 years into the future.
Starr, you've seen a lot of political change over the years. You've been involved in it. You've been in the thick of it, trying to change and make the world a better place. How would you say the nation has evolved over the last 2 decades regarding, politically, regarding the life issues?
I think we've hardened our heart. I think that there are people that believe that abortion is just established law, and we look the other way. And I think that that is a very dangerous place to be, because the last time we had this big moral question on the table during slavery, the Lord doesn't let the hardness of our hearts stay there forever. And unfortunately, during that time, great pain was the result, great war, great loss. I'm hoping that we as a nation enter into a real serious repentance. I know that we're not going to go to war, and thank God that those that would get the bizarre disposition to think that they could take justice in their own hand and start shooting doctors and other things that we saw 20 years ago in this country, that has stopped. Because I think what we have that they didn't have during the Civil War era was we have our decent people in these quiet communities that are doing amazing work through our crisis pregnancy centers and many, many others. While we have those that are working legislatively, we have wonderful organizations that are making sure that they keep moving this issue in front of the politicians in Washington. We have others that are doing their work as well. So it is dark, though. I don't want to pretend that, you know, there's great hope out there. I think that most people are just living with that secret sin, and society doesn't mind.
Well, in very practical terms, Marjorie, tell us, connect the dots. Tell us what needs to happen for the Supreme Court to reverse themselves. How is that put in place, and how do the American people play a part in that?
Well, it is very concrete. Every individual vote is going to be directly connected to whether we have a Roe majority on the Supreme Court or a Roe minority on the Supreme Court. Every single person voting in this election will have an impact on whether we are able to get a start to unravel Roe versus Wade. And that's, of course, because our president will be the person who nominates the next justice of the Supreme Court, and the Senate will be the ones who either block or confirm the next one. So we're either looking at a dramatic pro-abortion triple crown among the House and the Senate and the presidency, where we will not be able to affect the court, will not start to roll back Roe versus Wade. Maybe 20 years. For 20 years it could be locked in place that way. You look at the candidates, who do you want making that decision over life and death? In every single race after race, from the top race, from the presidency on down, which one do I want making a decision over who the next Supreme Court justice is? Who do I trust more?
Well, political pundits on both sides of the abortion issue seem to be in agreement that the Supreme Court is closely divided on the abortion issue. That right now there's a pro-abortion majority of 5-4 on the court, with Kennedy sometimes swinging either way. So it appears that abortion is really going to be the focal issue for this next presidential election. Is that true?
Absolutely, yeah. With a 5-4 pro-Roe majority, everything is at stake. Everything is at stake. Who that next justice is will be a life and death decision, and who that next justice is depends on the presidency and on the U.S. Senate. It's just very simple.
And this is where you can make a major impact on those who serve on the Supreme Court. It's up to you to vote for a president that stands up for unborn babies. The outcome will likely affect the judicial landscape for the next 20 years and decide the future of preborn children. We've been discussing the impact this presidential election will have on the U.S. Supreme Court and the legalization of abortion. But does it really matter if a president takes a stand for unborn babies and their mothers? Aren't there more important issues to tackle? Do you think it's important that the next president be pro-life?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
If you don't understand fundamentally why we live, what humanity is about, if there's no relationship to God, then the only required of man becomes conformity. So you have a different view about the role of government. You have to fundamentally understand what the framers had in mind and intended when they said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Can one vote really make a difference?
Your vote, my vote, is our biggest hope for success. Our votes are directly related to whether unborn children will live or die. We have the power to swing this entire election. And if we swing this entire election, then who's on the Supreme Court will allow us to start to unravel Roe versus Wade.
Curt, how do you think the voters can affect what the Supreme Court does with the abortion issue in the future?
It's completely up to the voters. It's up to the voters who they elect as president, and it's up to the voters who they elect as their senators. And sometimes, you know, what really gives me pause is there are people who don't want to vote for moderate conservatives, let me say. They'd rather sit home and let a liberal president win, or let liberals get elected to the Senate. And I don't think they realize that although that may not affect some policies immediately, that will drastically affect who's going to be on the Supreme Court. And so even if you're not completely crazy about that moderate senator or that moderate president, vote for them over the liberal president or the liberal senator, because in the long term it will have a huge effect on the Supreme Court and thus a huge effect on abortion law.
One thing is certain, the outcome of this presidential election could change the course of history for millions of unborn babies and women. Make sure you're part of the decision. As you've heard from our guests today, changing our nation is in your hands. Go to facinglife.tv and register to vote. It's the first step to making a positive impact in America. Once you're a registered voter, print out your form and mail it to us. Then we'll enter you into a drawing for a free laptop. We're serious about having you make a difference for our nation. For more information, go to facinglife.tv.